How did the party go yesterday? Everyone's, yeah, yeah. I see. Everyone is really excited. So that's why my first slide is this. I know everybody's tired. I know everybody had lots of different, speeches, presentations. So this should be fun. Not a lot of text. I promise this. But basically, I wanted to make a bold statement saying that I think that DeFi is still in sandbox. And what I mean by that is that we have a lot of things to play with, but then it's really hard to get in or out. And yes, there are ways to do it more conveniently, but the first thing, and I guess all of you guys will agree with this, is that on and off crypto off-ramps are just nuts. It's complicated, it's very inefficient, it's cumbersome, it's tiring. Well, you get a lot of the troubles for that. But let's take a look into why exactly I think that DeFi is a sandbox. What's the typical process? So not of you guys that get paid in crypto already, so you're in. But let's imagine the average person. So let's imagine someone who said, heard from the friend, oh, hey, here's this interesting, cool thing. Let me try it out. Okay, what do? I have my money in my bank account, credit, debit card, whatever it is. So you have that. What do you do next? Well, then you need to wire your money to an exchange. How do you do that? Well, first you have to open an account on exchange. You have to, basically validate yourself. Then the exchange gives you an address where you have to basically, credentials. Then you have to wire money to the exchange. What happens there? Well, an exchange has a list of available tokens. So you have to buy the token there. What happens then? Well, okay, you wanna access DeFi. So you need the native gas token for that network that you intend to use. So you can't forget about that. Let's say you have all of that. What do you do next? Well, then you need to have an EOA wallet, and then you need to transfer the tokens that you just bought on an exchange to your EOA wallet outside of it. What do you do next? Well, then you connect your EOA wallet to a dApp that you actually want to execute some sort of a transaction, right? What was the initial attempt there to do? How do you access DeFi? And then finally, well, the dApp bundles, prepares the transaction for you, and then you sign it in your wallet. And voila, now finally, you are actually using DeFi. Now, exactly the same thing, but in reverse. How do you get out? So let's say you've done whatever you wanted to do in your DeFi. Now you actually have to get your money out. How do you spend it? Somehow merchants, right, in the real world do not want to accept your baby Doge or whatever you're using for some reason. But the point is that it's also the cumbersome way out. Now there are many ways to cut it, but let's look into a potential way. How do we cut this everything in the middle? How do we cut it to the point where it is just your EOA wallet that is your gateway to the actual, put it this way, traditional or existing or basically old finance? Is it even possible to do that? And what my point of today's conversation, it is possible. And what I believe is that this approach will actually change the way that we interact with DeFi and will change the fact that DeFi is still largely in a sandbox. And then just going back to the first slide I said, like, why sandbox? Like, why do I keep saying this? Well, because, again, you can benefit from DeFi. We have a lot of primitives. Over the past 3 years, the community has basically replicated all existing financial primitives that exist currently in the world. We've started going way beyond. We started creating new financial primitives. But again, you can only benefit them in this very, very small amount of use cases. Now, this approach, that can change it, and that's basically how you can actually go outside and spend your money in a more efficient way than your currently bank allows you to do that. And I think that's what DeFi was intended to do. So if we just go forward and we say, oh, I'm going backwards. That's good. Okay. What could we do if there was a way to connect your EOA wallet straight to your debit card, like directly? No custody wallets, no basically centralized exchange services in the back end, but essentially it is your EOA wallet that executes the transaction and you have money available in your wallet. Well, everybody knows Alchemix, or most of you guys do. What you could do is, well, you could have a self-repaying loan and essentially pay for, I don't know, a car lease that you have. You have some assets, you put it in Alchemix, the loan repays itself, you have the debt that you can spend, you spend the debt, and you pay off your car lease. What you could do is you could do a real DeFi savings. And what it means is that you can deposit into your vault, you can earn yield, but you can spend the yield only, not the principal, again, to buy whatever, your Netflix subscription. You could have somebody showed me this like halal thing from Liquidity yesterday here, but basically, you can have your zero interest loans to pay for your rent. You have some ETH, well, you can basically mint LUSD with your ETH without, with basically 0% and essentially pay for your rent. While ETH appreciates or depreciates, that's up to you. You could have a very interesting, I would say like traditional mechanics, right? So it's a very popular thing, especially in the retail, which is buy now, pay later. Well, you could, buy now, pay later on the card, but essentially just borrowing, through efficient, pools, for example, like Morpho. What I mean is, these are just like some of the use cases, but essentially it could be literally anything. So whatever the logic that is there on chain, there is a way to connect it directly. And well, that's essentially what I'm talking about, is that we need to make sure that we can expand DeFi use cases and make sure that people, not just a few of us, degens, that know and understand how to get efficiently in and out, but can do that and can easily use the tools that they are used to in the traditional life. Now, here in the MENA region or Europe or the US, the most popular last mile usage of your finance is not the bank account. Like, people have bank accounts, but how do you actually spend the money? Well, it is cards. Now, that's not the same for Asia, that's not the same for the African region, but it is for, call it the Western world. And what it means is that I believe the efficient approach is not to try to rebuild whatever the Visa and MasterCard have already done. They're actually very open to crypto, unlike whatever the media, right, or is trying to picture that. But what I'm saying is that we don't need to replicate all the infrastructure they've already built. They've connected millions, tens of millions of merchants already globally, worldwide. That actually gives you this immediate access to spendings of things where you want. It's really hard, and I think that it's very obvious that we as an industry, we failed to convert majority of the merchants into accepting the tokens natively. It's only a few minority that do accept crypto natively. And even if they do, they only accept the major ones. BTC, ETH, whatever, USDT, but you can never force them to accept your own token, whatever you just issued, right? So we have to find the ways to connect the native DeFi rails with the existing finance rails. You ask me, well, how does that work, right? So good talks, like how do you actually do that? Well, in short, we proposed a very interesting or simple structure where you can connect different networks essentially via two parts. So via the dApp that basically serves your end consumer, but at the same point, it's basically an app that connects to the traditional and existing infrastructure. Now, we're not going to go into the details of all of this, and at this point, I could have said, all right, that's your answer, that's all, folks, right? But let's dive deeper into where it's actually really interesting. It's on the on-chain part. On the on-chain part, now, the way you can connect the existing infrastructure, the existing finance, which consists of like this whole different things about the merchant bank, the acquirer bank, the issuer bank, the Visa network, the MasterCard network, how does that all work, how does the validation work, et cetera, we drill down on the on-chain part. Now, if you guys, I actually wanted to ask you a question. How many of you guys have like one or maybe two or maybe more crypto debit cards? Like, do you use that, or you basically use in exchanges? Okay. I would assume mostly, probably most likely, it's going to be Binance card or maybe even Coinbase card, but basically one of the what's so-called like centralized services out there. What it means is the way it works is very simple. You open an account with them, they give you a custodied wallet. So basically it means that in order to access your crypto, you actually need to essentially give a custody of your crypto to those guys. Now, we're not arguing whether that's good or bad. That's basically up to the user to decide. But it gives two options. One is it gives you an opportunity to spend what's so-called just in time. What it means is that you can essentially, wire your crypto to the service provider, and then you don't need to settle it every time. You can just basically tap your card, and then all of a sudden, then your ETH is spent. Now, how does it work and why is it possible? So when you tap your card, Visa, MasterCard, doesn't matter, they're all pretty much the same. They require that the finality of the transaction, so the communication between the issuer bank, the acquirer bank, and basically, in between Visa, MasterCard, is no more than 8 seconds. Now, 8 seconds is less than Ethereum block. What it means is that for any decentralized service provider, that would be impossible to validate. Like the block just literally, I mean, you can be lucky, right? But you cannot guarantee that at least one block is already produced, so you can have enough confirmations that, yes, the transaction actually did happen, that yes, the money was actually transferred. So on the good end, this is what decentralized service providers, that's the utility, that's the features that they can provide you. On the downside, for example, there's now more and more popping up of non-custodial crypto debit cards. Now, those are also very different and could be very different, but typically the way it works is this. It's a fork of a MetaMask wallet. It's an app. You basically create a smart, like you create a wallet with this provider. They generate the seed phrase. You keep the seed phrase. It's non-custodial. And then what happens is that you actually still have to somehow give the money or give the crypto to the service provider so that they can settle it. Now, that model is called pre-funding. Basically, what it means is that you give a chunk of your crypto, the one that you say you want to sell, to the provider. They settle it. They fund your card account with fiat, and then you go off and you spend it. Now, in that case, you're not bound by this 8-second finality rule by Visa, MasterCard. What it means is that, well, you don't really care about crypto anymore because you technically sold it. Now, that also creates the limitations. Let me give you an example. How many of you guys have actually tried to buy something from, from a store online with crypto? Like, you probably saw it many times, but you did. How does that work, right? Very simple. You choose an asset that you want to buy, like an item, I don't know, new sneakers, new shoes, like t-shirt. And then you say, I want to pay in Bitcoin, right, and ETH. What happens? They give you the settlement address. They give you a QR code. So it's basically very dumb. Like, that's why on and off ramps are just dumb. It's basically just simple transfers in and out. So they give you the QR code. You have to send your money there. And then it's you who has to make sure that it's the correct network, it's the correct amount, it's the correct address. Because if something is not there, then the acquirer would just say, no, the condition's not met, you didn't buy your shirt, whatever, bye-bye. And what happens is that, well, again, you're bound to limitations, what tokens they can settle. You're bound to limitations, okay, what networks they support. And then what's the saddest part is that you're bound to, well, it's still nothing to do with DeFi. Like, literally, that's just the same, I would say, like, user conditions or user base as, I want to buy some Bitcoins, the price goes up, I sell it, I'm good, that's it. Now, that's not really DeFi. So the question is this: how do we transform from those like simple transfers and QR codes to a more complex structure, but it gives you and it allows you to expand infinitely into this like on-chain logic and on-chain use cases? So we propose this. We propose the structure that basically separates different kinds of the logic. Now, I'll start with something that I already talked about, which is the dumbest part, which is the settlement contract. Now, the settlement, in a sense, is just a simple confirmation that you've accepted correct amount of money from the correct person, and then you agree that the money has been received, so basically you can settle it with a merchant, because there's always counterparties, right? Whether you're trying to cash out crypto, whether you're buying your t-shirt, whatever it is. Now, that's the simplest part. But what you can do is, because we live in DeFi, because we have hundreds, thousands of forks of Uniswap, we have now aggregators of hundreds of thousands of Uniswaps, and we now have the meta aggregators, so the aggregators of the aggregators. What happens is that you can almost, you can settle or you can swap almost anything that's liquid on chain. So what it means is that if the community comes up with a token, they have their own liquidity, it becomes liquid. And what it means is that that token can then be used to, to buy something. What's interesting part about that is that you create an abstraction for the merchant, because the merchant doesn't have to accept, I use this example of Baby Doge, let's use something else, let's use, I don't know, Shiba. The merchant may not want to have the basically exposure to this token. The merchant may not want to have an exposure to any token. So this is the part where you can create, again, the first level of abstraction and swap that Shiba to something that can be settled, something that any settler would accept. USDC, ETH. You don't want to have this price fluctuation exposure? Well, just keep it in stables, USDT or whatever. The second part is something that I would call the trusted registry. Now, what it is, essentially, and what it stands for the name, is that to create this logic where you can interact with different smart contracts and you can allow for specific logic to happen, and I'll explain just in a second what kind of a logic it is. You can create the trusted registry on chain of what kind of smart contracts do you think that are good, so good actors, and what kind of actors are not so good. And you can expand from there. What do I mean? Let's take a more complicated case. Let's say you don't want to just cash out your baby Doge. Let's say you want to cash out your robbed staked ETH. Or you know what, let's take it more complicated. It's a robbed staked ETH that's actually robbed by some other platform. I don't know, Pyrex or whatever. How do you settle that? That's basically just like 2 levels of unwrapping that you need to perform in order for the token, the underlying asset, to be accessible. I use the example of Yorn Vault. Now, when you deposit into the Yorn Vault, let's say you use USDC, right? So it's a liquid asset, you can settle it. When you deposit in Yorn, you're given what? You're given the Vault token. So essentially, that's just the token that is not liquid by itself, but it can be unwrapped because it represents the share of the underlying asset. So what it means is that you can create a registry of the contracts that you can build or someone else can build logic, but you can interact. So you are allowing your contract to execute basically third-party contracts actions. And again, this simple or complicated concept of, oh, well, that's a robbed token, or that's a stake token, or that's a derivative of something. If there's a logic and there's an on-chain path to liquidity, so you can unwrap or you can swap it, and in the end it's settleable, that gives you this opportunity. So what happens there is essentially you can have something you could call like a cash out proxy contract, and that's basically just your main logic and management of how do you actually cash out. So how do you connect the buyer, the seller? How do you connect the merchants? How do you, how do you create this simple like cash out use case? Let's use the simple example here. And the simplest example is this. Let's imagine the provider of your crypto debit card that would allow you to connect your MetaMask, Trust, Fed wallet, whatever it is, right? So you connect your wallet where you custody your crypto. The first question that you may ask is, okay, well, if I want to cash out, we're using, again, I hope it's clear at this point, we're only using pre-funding model because there's no way that this form or this logic could be used in just-in-time funding because you actually have to settle crypto before you can tap your card. Otherwise, it's just impossible. It's either the service provider is taking the risk, well, will Anton pay me at the end of the block, or maybe not? How do I know if Anton already has some transactions out of this wallet, so I'll not be able to take it out? So it always works only on the pre-funding model. But let's take this case. So let's assume that, okay, well, I want to cash out. The first question, as a DeFi user, and again, it's a sad week, right? I guess all of you heard about Euler. It's sad, and I think a lot of the protocols are affected. Some of the protocols I mentioned are affected, but the first thing that they teach you is, okay, well, what about security? How can I get wrecked? If I use this kind of the service provider, how can I get wrecked? Yes, I custody my own crypto. That's good, all right? So check number 1. But now I try to interact with this contract. How does that work? The first thing that you would ask is, well, what about the allowance? So let's say I give infinite allowance, I don't care, to Uniswap because, it's a trusted contract. Millions of people used it, so maybe I'm gonna be safe too. Maybe until one day, you don't know. So the first thing that you would do is, okay, well, what about the specific allowance that you set for the tokens? Let's say I want to settle my baby Doge. So I have to give the specific allowance for that specific token, for that specific transaction to make sure that my contract exposure is always 0. So at the end of the day, I can use my card, but if I don't use it, I know that my wallet is safe. So unless I leave my seed phrase somewhere else, or maybe you're a BOSC owner, but then it remains sort of safe. This is exactly the structure that allows you to set the allowance protection. So you can set the rules that essentially you can create the logic that, well, any transaction will revert. If the allowance amount and the amount of the transaction do not match, they exceed below, or they differ a lot, the transaction can revert. So you can force your users to always keep this allowance to 0. You basically preset it for them. So that's step number 2. Okay, so that's good. So now I know that I custody my crypto. I know that already is safe. I know that the contract, if it gets rugged, if it gets hacked, and we're not yet to the point where exactly my money goes to, but I know that my money is safe. So in a sense, I cannot get wrecked for now. We're going to the third part. Okay, so the contract, now it has my money. Now it has my precious baby Doge that I wanted to settle. What happens there? So how does Binance, or how does any crypto debit card, or how does any crypto bank or not a bank, whatever, actually settle my crypto? Like, what's that glorious magic thing about settling your crypto? What does it mean? Well, essentially, settling a crypto, it actually means just basically finding the counterparty to a trade. Now I have some baby Doge, so basically what I need is I need to find the baby Doge buyer, so somebody who wants to buy the same amount. So just, that's basically why it was a native move for Binance or Coinbase to create this kind of like financial extensions, because it's just, an extension to their main product. But now we have this decentralized or non-custodial service provider, so how does it actually work? Well, essentially, they will not be able to find the baby Doge seller, right, or buyer. So that's why you go to the pools. All right, so we get rid of the baby Doge. Now you have, let's say, USDC. What happens there is that you still need a counterparty to settle USDC to get your fiat out, because you need to fund the card, right? So somebody still has to be there. And that's the funniest part about, well, who is that seller provider? Well, there's only a few options. One is the market makers, 2 is the exchanges, and 3 is OTC. So in either case, OTC, well, it depends on the amount. OTC desk will not deal with your $50 of USDC, whatever you just swapped from the baby Doge. So that's not really a good option. 2 is the exchange. Well, then you're bound to whatever the exchange wants to accept. So that's already the settlement token is limited. 2 is the rates. 3 is the latency. So we're bound to just one part, the market makers. Why would the market makers want to participate in something like this? Well, easy, because you can provide a constant flow of crypto or the fiat, because on and off ramp, right, it's just basically the reversal process. So one is you have lots of fiat, you need some crypto. On the other side, you have some crypto, you need some fiat out. So now we solve this. What happens there is now what you need to do is you need to reconcile with the market maker, and that's where the bridge contract is. Now imagine this. Let's say you had your, again, like baby Doge on whatever chain. Let's create the chain where it doesn't exist. Let's say like Avalanche, I don't know, or Gnosis. How many of you guys have ever used Gnosis network to do something? I see the developers, yes, okay. There are no users probably. Anyways, what I mean is when you settle the token on that network, the market maker may not want to accept it on that network. And that's just a fair square reason, right? So not everyone wants to settle their tokens from ETH. If I want to top up my card for $10, I don't want to pay $20 of commission and then another $10 to pay for the network fees, right? So what happens is that you go for what? L2s. If you're going for the L2s, most of the big market makers are there, but then what if your specific counterparty is not? So you have to have a specific way and a trustless way to bridge the transactions. And what it means, yes, there's a lot of bridges, there's a lot of bridge aggregators, there's a lot of easy way to do that, but the question is then, how do you initiate that call initially trustlessly? How do you initiate that call from your cash out proxy to the bridge contract and the receiver proxy on the another network? Now, this is basically where the separation of the call, this is where, again, the trusted registry we talked about, but this is the case that allows you for the user to initiate the transaction on one network and basically bridge it and receive it on another network. As to what kind of bridges you use, that's basically up to you guys. The question is, well, we got safe up to this point, but then what about bridges? Bridges are, well, nuts, right? So, okay, what are the risks? So let's say now I'm using this thing, and I wanted, my precious baby Doge, and I wanted my money on the card in basically like 30 seconds or something, right? I don't want 15 minutes for the bridge confirmations. Like, how many blocks do you need to confirm to go, let's say, like from Arbitrum to like mainnet? 64, right? Do I want to wait 15 or 20 minutes for my money to settle? You don't, because that's not a good user experience. So how do you go around it? Okay, what if we actually don't move the money? What if we just basically move the data? So now we get to, this omni-chain or cross-chain messaging services. Because essentially what your liquidity on Gnosis and your liquidity on mainnet, well, it's still money, but it's just money on different chains. And all you need to do is to have the trustless confirmation that my money is on another chain. It's under, basically, custody of specific contract. It is there, but I don't have it on this network. But I can reconcile with you because you know that I can guarantee that my money is there. So then you can create any off or near time logic that, you know what, you actually don't need to move money every single time that your user wants to cash out $10. Now you say that, you know what, I can keep my $10 on Gnosis, I can keep my $10 on Avalanche, I know that I have my $20 on those two chains, so now I can reconcile on ETH with my market maker. Now that is the unique way that creates, again, essentially creates your velocity of how you can expedite this cash out process. You don't need the confirmations, you don't need this tons of basically blocks to be produced on each network to confirm that something indeed happened. So when your transaction is approved on one network, you can guarantee that the money sits there, so you don't need to have this risk of moving money every single time. You decrease your transaction time, you decrease your, basically finality time with market maker. Now we get to the finally the hardest part. Let's say you've settled your crypto. How does Binance actually fund your card, right? Or any crypto debit card. So let's say you have a debit card with them. Where's the money coming from? Like, how does it all work, right? Well, the funniest part there is because essentially what happens is there's three counterparties in this process. One, there's Visa, MasterCard, which is the network that basically issues your card. There's UnionPay, there's the Russian Mir, there's multiple ones, but these are the two major ones that we talk about. Amex, if you're using Amex, I know where you live. Anyways, that's basically not many people that use it, but anyhow. What happens is there's a network, there's an issuer bank. The issuer bank has the relationship with Visa and says that, you know what, for our customers, we want you to issue this card. So they go ahead and issue it. And then there's something like your crypto debit card provider or Binance, it doesn't matter. It's basically all of them the same. They have the relationship with the bank that tell them, you know what, guys, we're gonna bring you many customers. So if you sponsor your BIN number and issue the cards for our clients and customers, you're gonna make a lot of money. So then what happens is every time you come to the Binance and say, can I get my card? Can I get my money funded? What happens is this like three-lateral, basically cooperation. You, Binance, the issuer bank, and then the Visa MasterCard. And then it always goes this way. So whenever you are topping up your card or using your card through the crypto debit card provider, what happens is it's the Binance that confirms that, yes, indeed, you actually gave them the money and you can spend it. And they talk to the acquirer bank, where on the ledger of the acquirer bank, they literally just move money in between the Binance account and your account. So it's the Binance that gives you the money. And then they reconcile somewhere else, so basically move money, it doesn't matter. And then when you spend your money from your card, it's also just the acquirer bank and the Visa and the merchant bank that cooperate in this transaction. So there's no crypto related in that thing whatsoever, even when you do this just-in-time funding. So my point here is today is I believe that there's an easy way that you can do, you can help DeFi to get out of the sandbox. There's a way that you can use all of this amazing and cool financial primitives, and there's a way, too boring, I guess. Anyways, so there's a way for you to access all these amazing features and get more for your money, and that's the whole goal of the DeFi, to make sure that you can do more with your money. So that's an approximate approach. We have, Jesus, I keep going this. You go under this link, and the code is open source, so there's a GitHub thing. We have the apps open source. You can check basically how and what's built. This approach and this thing is live on 5 different networks, so Mainnet, Arbitrum, Optimism, Gnosis, and Polygon, and it works. And what's important is that we've tried it and tested over the past year, and we believe that this is the model that will allow for any DeFi protocol builder to focus on building your logic, on innovating there, and actually have a native access for your users or other users to use or benefit that in the real world. To have that access of their money and the benefit that the protocol provides, but use it actually really just somewhere there. So thank you very much. And yeah, if you have any boring questions about finance, I'm happy to answer them, but thank you for listening.